whatever we might call non-dual understanding or realization or awakening or whatever. It's just kind of an acceptance of how it is, an acceptance of everything, including our human foibles and our opinions and our moments of upset, our moments of resistance. It's really, just accepting more and more, not as something we do kind of, but a kind of natural outcome, I think, of recognizing the uncontrollable nature and the wholeness of it all. Recognizing that whatever life moves me to do is a happening of the whole. It's a happening of the totality. It's not an individual little me, which doesn't even really exist. Everything that I'm calling good or bad is part of this totality. At a deeper level of magnification or whatever, we can't even find it or pin it down or anything else. And at the same time, we can't ignore or dismiss the dimension of reality in which does depend a lot on conceptualization and memory and all of that. That's the dimension in which we live our everyday lives. The most helpful thing I can do really is just to stop trying to do something and just be with the bare actuality of the feelings themselves, just the sensations, the energy. But there's nobody inside here who can kind of make that happen. There's just ever unfolding subtleties in this whole exploration of reality. And it's really important not to fixate on any particular kind of way of conceptualizing it, exploring reality. And I don't feel like there's some final landing place or some ultimate conclusion. It's more like an open exploration, like this moment, aspects of a seamless, unfolding, ever-present whole that doesn't really have any borders or divisions. Like the ocean, it has a lot of different waves and movements and stuff, but it's one ocean. When you just go into something deeply and you just sort of tune into that presence, that beingness, that whatever shape it's taking, whether it's taking the shape of pain or pleasure or whatever shape it's taking, there is something there that's quite wonderful or ecstatic or radiant, an aspect of this undivided totality, and you can't pin it down. It's a possibility that can be discovered and explored.
This is Nick Hyam from nisargayoga.com. You're listening to the Nonduality Podcast. In this episode, Paul Dobson is joined again by Joan Tollifson.
It's cheesy, but life really is kind of a guru in it, because it will take everything away from you and it will put you under the hammer until it comes out with like pure sort of diamond. Eventually, one way or another, you either go with it or you resist to it, but one way or another, it will take everything away. So it's kind of, there's something with going with the flow here.
Yeah, that's one of the blessings, I think, of both of getting old and also of whatever we might call non-dual understanding or realization or awakening or whatever. It's just kind of an acceptance of how it is, an acceptance of everything, including our human foibles and our opinions and our moments of upset and our everything, and the fires and the smoke and our dislikes of it and our moments of resistance. It's really, just accepting more and more, not as something we do kind of, but it's just a kind of natural outcome, I think, of recognizing the uncontrollable nature and the wholeness of it all. Recognizing that whatever I am moved to do, however I see all that, and whatever life moves me to do in response to all that is a happening of the whole. It's a happening of the totality. It's not an individual little me, which doesn't even really exist, that can sort of figure that out and do it. And, we don't get to choose what sources of information we trust or what causes we care about or what our opinions are on these subjects. It's just, it all is happening. So it doesn't mean we can't or shouldn't do anything. It just means that we're not the author. We're not the creator.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the misunderstanding of the whole no doer thing, isn't it? I feel that's kind of bypassing, as they say, isn't it?
Yeah. No. So it's like, if you, like, for example, from years of meditation and whatever else, psychotherapy, all kinds of things, this organism called Joan, this person, has learned that if there's an upset going on in this organism, if there's disturbance of some kind, whether that's depression or anxiety or whatever it is, the most helpful thing I can do really is just to stop trying to do something and just be with the bare actuality of the feelings themselves, just the sensations, the energy. But what I've noticed is that I can't, there's nobody inside here who can kind of make that happen. I may have, the thought may arise that would be a good thing to do, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what will then happen right away. It might be that, in fact, something else occurs. An old habitual pattern takes over, and instead I go and eat a bunch of crackers, or, fortunately I'm not shooting heroin anymore, so it's fairly benign, the things that I do to distract myself, and there's nothing wrong with those. I don't see those as wrong. It's just that they're not necessarily helpful. They just kind of they're not necessarily helpful. But so there can be a learning of that kind of thing. There can be a learning that occurs. But again, that all just occurs by itself. And whether we can carry that out in any given moment, addiction recovery programs of various different kinds, they give you various tools to work with. And whether you're capable of using those tools in any given moment is a happening of the whole universe. But it doesn't mean that we then pick up the story that you're describing of, there's nothing I can do, so might as well just light up and shoot up. And so, although that in fact may happen, so.
Yeah, I can only go by my own experience with it, obviously, but it sort of ended when it ended. One day it stopped, and that was it. I never went back, and I went, oh, actually, exactly. This is better.
I mean, with alcohol, it ended for me when I tried to stop drinking a number of times, and then finally, when it happened, I don't know why or how it happened when it did. And similarly with cigarette smoking, I mean, I was a heavy smoker when I was a drunk, and it was probably the hardest thing I ever gave up was smoking. And I tried to stop, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 times or something, and I would stop for a couple of weeks and then start up again. And then the last time I never started up again, but I don't know what was different about the last time. I mean, it wasn't, but somehow, and I have this finger biting compulsion, which I still flares up. And I'm 72 years old. I've been doing it since childhood, and it still happens. And sometimes when I notice that it's starting up, there's an ability to stop and just kind of be with what's happening and not go with it. But at other times, that ability just isn't there. The thought might arise to do something like that, but it doesn't have any juice. It's like in addiction, there are two sort of conflicting wants. There's I want a cigarette, and there's I want to stop smoking. And those are conflicting desires. And there's nobody here who gets to control which one of those desires has the most energy and power in any given moment. No. They are arguing with each other, and they're literally arguing with each other. And in any given moment, and they're just thought patterns, really. They're just thought patterns, both of them. And in any given moment, there's no one at the control panel who gets to choose which of them is going to have the most energy, the most compulsion at that moment, and which one will win out. And it's really, it's really in many ways a matter of grace. Like I have no idea why I sobered up and some of the people who were drinking at the bar with me died of alcoholism or something related to it. And it's just grace, really, in a way. But it's interesting that I sobered up from alcohol with a a therapist she did not believe in the disease model of alcoholism, and she believed it was a choice that you had made unconsciously for various reasons, and that you could bring that choice into conscious awareness and then make a different choice. And I think really the chooser there is awareness, actually.
Yeah.
Not the little me, but although she of course didn't say it that way at the time, but and actually she would have me if when I was trying to quit smoking and I would say I can't stop, she would have me change that to I won't stop. I won't quit. I had to always put it in that way. So it was a whole different approach from the sort of no choice approach that I eventually came to.
Yeah.
And for me, it worked. It seemed to me, because of the model in which she was working, this therapist, it seemed to me that I had made a choice to stop drinking. And then I had made a choice to stop smoking. And I sort of overlooked the fact that it took 6 tries to stop smoking and all the times before when I hadn't, anyway. And I think a lot of people who have that experience where they, quote unquote, decide to stop doing something and then it works for them, they actually do stop, they come to the conclusion that anyone can do this because I did it. And It's a matter of just, making up your mind and doing it. And there's a certain grain of truth in that, because there is a certain making up of your mind, so to speak, that happens, but it's in the moment, but it's, or even, in some decisive moment. But again, that's not something that the little individual imaginary self is doing. And so it's like, and I think for me, if I had not had this compulsive finger biting thing, I would have concluded that anybody can do this because I did it, and it's just a matter of choice. You just have to see how you're making this unconscious choice, and then you have to, make a different choice. But this, which has persisted, this finger biting compulsion, which has persisted through all of the many, many, many approaches that I have used and tried, has really taught me that it really drove home the choiceless nature of life.
Yeah.
Because clearly, while those things might appear to work in any given moment, they have not worked overall.
Oh yeah, it's all to really take it even further. It's beyond choice and no choice, isn't it? I mean, to say that there's a doer of some kind that stops it would be to make an assumption that we know what a choice is, we know what a mind is, we know what thoughts are, we know what any of it is, and that there's some controller, which we know what it is, controlling all of it, all of this mysterious just happening. I can't to make it really simple, and I keep bringing it back to the absolute simplicity of things nowadays. I can't say what's going on right now. I don't know what's happening. I don't know the words that are going to come out next. It's all just kind of this miraculous, spontaneous arising. And I don't know what it is.
Yes, that's true. That's true. And that's really an important insight and seeing. And at the same time, there's the danger of all of us being stuck in our opinions, none of which are absolutely certain.
Yeah.
We can't ignore or dismiss the level or the dimension of reality in which does depend a lot on conceptualization and memory and all of that. But that's the dimension in which we live our everyday lives. I mean, so I find that it's a kind of dance between these different dimensions because, I think in the non-dual world, there's a danger where people kind of fixate on the dimension where I don't know what anything is. You can't pin anything down. And then, of course, in the average, everyday, ordinary world, that there's the fixation in the opposite direction, where we take all of what appears to be happening completely seriously as some sort of objective, observer, independent reality that's actually out there, and it's the way I see it and all that. There's just ever unfolding subtleties in this whole exploration of reality. And and that it's really important not to fixate on any particular kind of way of conceptualizing it.
It's kind of almost having your one foot in each world, isn't it? You've got one eye almost on the absolute. From that perspective, everything's beyond anything I can comprehend, where it somehow is all perfect beyond my ideas of perfection. Part of that quote-unquote perfection takes the shape of human beings dealing with these problems.
Yeah, you can't really detach, and you can detach, say, from politics. You can decide not to listen to the news and tune that out, but you can't really detach. I mean, you still have to go to work. You have to, you have to support yourself. You have to eat. You have to go shopping. You have to, you have to engage in on some level with the relative world, so to speak. And whether you know it or not, one of the things that came out of the women's movement, of course, was that everything is political in a way, that things we consider personal are actually political, and that tuning out the news is a political stance. That is a political, everything in that sense is political. Political just means kind of how we organize and work together as groups. That's really all it means. And so, yeah, it is. It's like having a foot in both worlds, or the one eye or the other eye or something. And it's really important, I think, to have both, not to fixate on one side or the other of the relative and absolute perspectives. And I find myself emphasizing that a lot because I'm mainly speaking to people who are in the non-dual world. If I were mainly speaking to people who aren't, I might be, and in many ways, at many times in my life, I have totally emphasized the other side of it, and I do totally emphasize the other side of it. But I'm more and more, sort of wanting to balance that.
Yeah.
Like when I had cancer, it's part of the totality. It's a happening of the totality. And it brings with it many different things. It brings many blessings came out of having cancer. And also there was pain, there was physical pain, there's physical limitation now that I'm left with as a result of it. And many blessings that came out of it, so I can't say that it was good or bad. It's considered a disease in the sense that it's cells performing in an abnormal way, destroying their environment, which is sort of what human beings are also doing and have often been compared to a cancer. So is it perfect? Is it imperfect? But it's what we can say is that it's an aspect of this undivided totality, and you can't pin it down as being all good or all bad or anything like that. Cancer cells are just moving completely in the way that they're attracted to move. They're just moved to do this I don't think they think, oh, this is good or this is bad. I think that's a human thing, to think, oh, this is bad or this is good or something like that. That's something we layer on top of it, which again is you can't entirely dismiss that. I mean, I do think female genital mutilation is a bad thing. I hope it gets stopped, and I think racism, et cetera. I could name many things. Child trafficking, I hope it gets stopped. I think it's a bad thing, So it's not like I can wipe out good and bad exactly, but I can recognize that they are part, that everything that I'm calling good or bad is part of this totality. And that at a deeper level of magnification or whatever, we can't even find it or pin it down or anything else.
Yeah.
And this is kind of interesting because how do I reconcile the truth of what I see with this danger I now see,
I just feel like I'm constantly exploring, and it's kind of unraveling on itself and sort of opening up, and just it's sort of a never-ending exploration, and I love it. I actually love the exploration, but seeking, as you said in the interview, it's like kind of puts a strong emphasis on there's something to find, there's something that isn't already here, that needs to be found, and And it also has, you hear people in the non-dual scenes talk about seekers, and it is often with a slight kind of lower sort of attitude. Oh, just the seekers, you know.
And it's the other side of that is the finders, that a lot of teachers present themselves as sort of, I have arrived, I have found the truth, this is the truth. They might even say, well, there's nothing I say is the truth, but then here it is, here's the truth.
Exactly.
And it's sort of like,
yeah.
That whole divide between teachers and students, seekers and finders, enlightened and unenlightened, feels very false to me, which isn't to say that I subscribe to some sort of false egalitarianism in which everybody is in exactly the same place and, is equally clear and equally free of the me system and all that sort of thing. I'm not saying that either, but I think, I like the word explorer and exploring, because like you say, it feels more, I feel like I'm exploring reality, and I don't feel like there's some final landing place or some ultimate conclusion that certainly that I've come to. It's more like an open exploration. And to me, that's so essential, and it feels like it's really missing in a lot of
Oh, definitely. I completely agree with that. That's a sign of a good teacher, really, that would then just sort of go through it with you, and rather than just hand you a statement that, the Buddha said or one of the Tibetan scriptures said or whatever else, oh, it says so here, so this must be the case. Well, what just because this guy said so, 1,000 years ago, is that we taking that as actual fact now, or are we going to explore it for ourselves? I think they've all got their value, but some of them do seem to shut in one angle. It's like, okay, here's lots of different ways of looking at it, explore them all. It's a never-ending, open-ended exploration. Just like that's the whole nature of reality, it seems, is it's open, infinite, literally infinite, isn't it? So why would the search be finite?
We kind of get these concepts, and I'm not saying that we necessarily, in other words, like, we may have gotten that concept through genuine exploration and direct insight, not just believing it or something. We may really have seen it deeply. It's not just something we picked up, but then we've framed it as a concept and a formula, kind of, in some way, there is no chooser or whatever it is, that we've kind of got our thing. And then it does become sort of boilerplate in a certain way, where we find ourselves kind of, and sometimes we do pick things up from other people, whatever it is, everything is consciousness is all there is. And, and I look at that deeply and I see, well, it's true. I never experience anything outside of or other than consciousness. But then, what is consciousness? I realize, like you said earlier, I don't really know what that is. And then, does the fact that I don't experience anything outside of consciousness mean there isn't anything? It's sort of like, but you pick these things up, and next thing you know, you find yourself saying it, well, there's all there is consciousness. And it's kind of boilerplate, and I've seen myself do that. I think we all do that to some degree, I think. And it's a kind of, it's probably inevitable to some degree, but it's something to just kind of be alert to, that, wait a minute, just sometimes I just stop and like find myself saying something, and then it's like, wait a minute, do I really know that? What am I saying? And because on one level it is all just, blah, 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 blah. But then again, we don't want to fixate on that perspective and ignore that. And so,
we can't make any final statement about this and say, that's it, got this in one statement, here it is, and then reel it off and tell other people this is how it is, because that can't ever possibly be true. It can to an extent, obviously. There's like maybe true with like a small t, and then there's truth with a big T, which you can't say, but true with a small t is kind of, you can say, there's I'm talking to another person, and I've got my tea here, and these are kind of true statements as far as they go, but all of it is kind of like just a big question mark.
It was interesting because like you said, words are, I mean, on one level they're just sounds, vibrations, or if you're reading, they're little black squiggles on a page, but yet they have this amazing capacity to materialize a kind of apparent world in the imagination. If you say the word chair, I have an image, I have a picture of what that is. I know what a chair is. It's not just a sound like bleh. It's chair, and I have a sense of what a chair is. And yet, if we really try to pin down, it's a category, it's an abstract category, and no abstract category is you can't really completely separate any category from everything that it's not. You can't really pin down exactly what it is. So it's useful. It's a useful category. It has relative reality, but it can't quite be pinned down. And of course, with the word share, it's functional, it's practical. There's not really a problem there. But when we have words like awareness, love, consciousness, truth, or when we're talking about human rights, or we get into much vaguer territory, and where we're talking about things that we kind of know what we're talking about, but when we look closely, what are we talking about? And everybody can kind of hear those words in very different ways and have a very different idea of what we're talking about. Whereas the word share, we're all going to have a pretty common understanding of what that is. But when we're talking about love, we may all have quite different ideas of what we're talking about. And so that's when it gets a little more difficult. And then we have words like you, or me, or Paul, or Joan. And again, we think there's something, and again, they're functional words and essential and useful, but we can't really find what we're talking about.
You mentioned awareness, and that's kind of a word I've had trouble with in the past, actually, because I was following, you go through these different kind of stages, don't you? And as you have shown with all the books you've read on your big list, there's some, the awareness focused books, there's like the kind of no self books and all of that kind of stuff. But with the awareness thing, I got so into the awareness teachings that I really thought I knew what awareness was. I started to reify it as a thing in my head, and I knew what awareness was. It was like this sort of empty, spacious thing, and I needed to find it somehow. And it was just so strange. I'd conceptualized it to such an extent, I'd got kind of trapped in it. And nowadays I realize I don't have a clue what awareness is, and I can't separate anything called awareness apart from the rest of experience. It's all that my experience is made of. It's all that I can say for sure right now is going on is what we might call awareness. But what does that mean? It's all a seamless whole, completely inseparable. It's not like there's awareness here and then there's Joan over there on my screen. It's awareness, all the way around. It's just boom, whatever that means. It might as well be called reality. So it's it's a slippery slope with these especially spiritual concepts, I find.
And that word gets used in such different ways too. Like the word awareness is pointing to the kind of the seeing of something. Like, for example, we might have a habitual belief or pattern of some kind. Like I might suddenly react to something you say and feel defensive and hurt or something like that. And awareness would be the seeing of that, the seeing of that defensiveness of that, and the seeing of what's at the center of that, the little me, the sense of, being put down or hurt or something or offended. And so awareness, and then of course there's the more Advaita type teaching in which awareness is the ground of being. Awareness is sort of synonymous with consciousness. It's what is what everything is. It's always present. And then in some of the Advaita teachings, and again, we don't know what Nisargadatta spoke a language that has been translated. We don't know what words, what he actually said, but he seems to distinguish, consciousness to him. He compares it to the urine that you pee out. It's like nothing. It's like, whereas awareness, primordial awareness, is like, and Muji has this teaching too. It's kind of like it's the unseen seeing, or the ultimate. Kind of, you can't experience it or see it or anything. It's the eye that can't see itself, sort of. And so there's that word awareness. Like in somatic awareness work, like Feldenkrais, it refers to, again, to that kind of sense of being aware of the body, tuning into, becoming aware of certain movements in the body and stuff. And then in other teachings, it's kind of the ground of being. And it's like, so people are using it in very different ways. And all of those ways are pointing to something that is experientially, that we can tune into experientially, and yet, because like you say, there's that danger of sort of reifying it, which I think is very much there with the Advaita teachings, because it's like, we kind of awareness is the awareness is the good thing, the supreme thing, the higher thing, the better thing, the ultimate, thing. And then there's the content of awareness, which is the sort of illusion, problem, not really real, messy. Don't go too much into that. And it creates a whole new duality, doesn't it? I don't find anything wrong with, that there's something to do. I mean, meditation, for example, in my opinion, can be helpful. And of course, again, meditation is a word that people use to mean so many different things. But what I just mean is just being quiet, being still. You don't have to be in the lotus position, but just, stopping all the busy work and the activity and everything, and just being here, and just noticing how it is, just being here, and allowing everything to be as it is, which isn't something you do. It's already allowed to be as it is. So it's just noticing how it is, really. And I find that very valuable, especially in a culture where we're incredibly busy and constantly bombarded with verbal information. I think it's a great thing to do. But of course, the danger in saying that then is that it becomes something that you need to do in order to get somewhere, or you need to do, you have something and it's got all these wonderful possibilities and it's helpful and it's useful. And then it has this darker side that is not what you originally intended. And so then you have to sort of, it's like, I often give the example that I heard from a Zen teacher once, that you have an illness and you take a treatment for the illness, like you have cancer and you go through chemotherapy, and then the treatment causes problems, and then you need an antidote for the treatment, and then the antidote starts to cause problems, and then you need an antidote for the antidote, and it's a never ending thing. I mean, and that's so these words like awareness, and being pointed to the fact that, yeah, there is kind of this spacious, boundless presence here, that in which everything is occurring. Noticing that is great. I mean, I think that's wonderful. And then there's kind of the danger in it that you start to reify it as, oh, the space. Yeah, that's, that's what I really am. And then there's, and et cetera, so it's like the pointers can be helpful. And then you need the antidote, which is probably why all those books are on my recommended reading list. Because, at one point, it was the cure, and then I needed an antidote for the cure. And the next book.
Well, exactly. And it's easy to forget certain teachings and were really helpful. You sort of just move beyond it at some point, don't you? And they no longer serve you.
It draws your attention to a certain aspect of reality, or a certain dimension of reality. It draws your attention to it. And that's helpful. And I find that I spiral around through a lot of different approaches, both in my own expression and in what's kind of alive for me in the moment, etc. That, sometimes I'm in a really radical non-dual mood, and sometimes I'm in a more, spacious presence, open kind of mood. And sometimes, there are different flavors or something. And I find my own message and interest changes, it's, and it doesn't seem to go in a linear way, like through stages, but more like a spiral or something. But it kind of, because I come back again and again to certain things, maybe in a different way or a deeper way, but everyone has a completely unique life journey. I mean, I took a lot of psychedelics. I read books on Zen and got into meditation and all that. I went to satsang teachers and radical non-dual teachers. I had psychotherapy. That I went through them all. They all applied, and they all felt like they were helpful, and they opened up and I can't even really separate them, except again with words and thoughts and concepts. I can separate out, well, these were my acid trips and my psychedelic experiences, and then this was my experience in psychotherapy, and this is my experience with depression, and this is my experience with alcohol, and this is my experience with finger biting compulsion and OCD, and this is my experience with this. And I can separate them into categories, but in actuality, like this moment, they're just aspects of a seamless, unfolding, ever-present whole that doesn't really have any borders or divisions. So they have some functional reality to make all those distinctions, but in terms of my life, so to speak, which is, again, kind of an odd concept, but in terms of my life, it was all just like the ocean. It has a lot of different waves and movements and stuff, but it's one ocean. It isn't like it was all one whole thing. And everybody's path is completely unique. And I think it's really important that no one. I'm always very put off when I hear teachers who say they know exactly where someone is and they know just what they need next or something, because I feel like, yeah, I mean, I can sometimes get a sense of where somebody's stuck or how somebody's, fixating or something. But no, I would never say I know where someone is at and I know what they need next or something. I mean, that just feels so false to me. And,
yes.
And to me, it's like, nobody knows. I don't know what I need next, much less what you need next or anything else. It's like we'll find out what I need next because it will be what happens next.
Yeah. That's the thing. No matter, it was always going to be different how you think it's going to be, isn't it?
There are certainly things that I wouldn't have chosen, but I'm really glad that I had them.
Yeah. Yeah. Same.
Similarly, the things that I, that I would definitely not want to give up and would choose. I can also see that they've had some negative impact also. And it seems to be the nature of reality, the nature of this manifestation, or anyway, that's all going to be there. That you can't have up without down and light without dark and left without right. You just can't. It's impossible. And so there are always going to be. We might get rid of a particular problem. We might create a society without racism, for example. I mean, that could happen. But there will be a new problem. There will be something else. There will be, there will never be a world without problems. We'll never have some sort of utopian, peaceful, tranquil world in which, everyone agrees. And so, that's just not going to happen.
It's all kind of perfectly orchestrated in its own way, but we kind of look at it and go, oh God, that's awful.
I remember I was at the pond in Ashland in the park once, and the ducks were mating. And, when the ducks are mating, it really does look pretty brutal to the females. I mean, the male duck jumps on top of the female, really looks like she's being drowned, And there was a woman there sort of trying to save the female ducks. And I said, hey, I think this is like, this is how it happens. This is how it works,
Yeah.
And, or like, and it's not always the females get the bad deal either. I mean, like the praying mantis, the female bites off the male's head after they have sex. It's like, nature can be pretty brutal. And we have, of course, as human beings, we have a capacity for a sort of special kind of brutality because of our ability to think and categorize, But a lot of that goes back to animal roots, to stuff that we find in biology. Evolutionary biology, I think, is very freeing in many ways because it points to how these things don't happen because we're just horrible people. They happen because they have biological roots, which again doesn't mean we can't change them or something. I mean, just because, the female getting raped is sort of the way it happens in nature or something doesn't mean human society has to forever function that way.
No, exactly.
But we might be able to change something like female genital mutilation, and maybe that won't ever happen again. That could happen, but there will always be things happening that are cruel in some way and harmful. But again, they're all part of this bigger whole.
Yeah. It functions perfectly in its own way. It's this, you look, stars are sort of dying, blowing up, being born. It's just chaos out there. And it's chaos in here as well. It's
I think where we get in trouble sometimes is that we, like if we see one animal attacking and eating another animal, which is certainly painful and doesn't look fun and all that. We feel very differently. Or the ducks jumping on each other in the pond, aside from that woman who was upset by it. But I mean, when I see the ducks jumping on each other in the pond, I don't feel deeply upset. But if I see a video of women in a war zone being gang raped or something, I feel upset. And the upset, if I look at it, has to do with the fact that if it was animals, we are animals, but if other animals, but if it has to do with the fact that there's some assumption there of free will, of that this is a choice, that these people could be doing better. And there's a grain of truth in that. It's like there is a possibility, unlike the duck who really has no choice. They just do what they are driven to do. The human being does have some possibility, when it's there, has some possibility of seeing, oh, this is wrong, this is hurtful, I'm not going to engage in this anymore. The human being has this possibility of waking up from this kind of thing that the duck doesn't have, And so there's a grain of truth in it, but of course that waking up can only happen when it happens. And it's not like an act of sort of individual free will, like if you are a soldier who's gang raping women in the middle of a war, that is what you are being driven to do in that moment. And there's no more choice there than there was when we were shooting up or getting drunk or whatever else.
Right,
and yet, as we both are manifestations of, there is this possibility in human beings to wake up from that pattern of behavior. And we can't say how that happens because it doesn't seem to be possible for everyone to wake up from those patterns, but it is a possibility. Whereas the praying mantis isn't going to wake up and stop biting off the male's head. That is not going to happen. And it probably shouldn't happen because in some way that's how the ecology of it all is functioning, part of the balance of nature. Whereas what we're doing, maybe it is part of the balance of nature. I had a conversation with Sailor Bob. I think I put it in one of my books when he was in Chicago and I was living there, and we were talking about evil or something. And he said, well, think about all the people that died in the Second World War. The soldiers on all sides, the Holocaust, the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, everyone who died during the Second World War. And he said, if the Second World War hadn't happened and they'd all lived, think of what that would have done for the human population explosion and climate change.
Yeah.
And,
that's a good point.
And again, that's not like, he wasn't saying, oh, therefore, rah, rah for the Second World War.
Yeah.
He wasn't trying to defend it or justify it, but it's like, maybe it is part of the balance of nature. in some way, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, we know, you know, if you're in physical pain and you just really give it complete open attention, if you just really go into the sensations as sensations, it's amazing what happens. I mean, it's like it becomes interesting, it changes, sometimes it goes away. Doesn't always go away, but it becomes bearable, if nothing else. It's very interesting. And then you really discover that a huge part of the suffering is in the sort of putting the pain out there in our conceptual way we do, so that there's this pain out there attacking me, and all of the thoughts that go with that about, I can't stand this. What if it gets worse? Will it ever go away? This is horrible. It's going to kill me. All those thoughts, that's the resistance to it, the feeling of being separate from it. All of that is really a huge part of the suffering. The physical sensations are quite different when you just really explore them. And it's the same with emotional pain. I mean, if you're having depression or, you know, grief, whatever it is, in really just opening to that, something very different is there than when we're sort of thinking about it and thinking, this is horrible, everything's horrible, how can I get out of this? You know, it's like, and again, you can't sort of do that through individual willpower or something, but it's a possibility that can be discovered and explored. And, you know, whether you're lucky enough to hear about that possibility and whether you're lucky enough to have it sort of be possible for you, and therefore something that is more and more available for you, is kind of the luck of the draw, it seems to me. But it is a possibility that can happen.
It's good karma.
Yeah.
Because you've been good in previous lives.
Yeah.
What was it Peter Brown said recently? You know, well, what do we even think pain is? You know, is it that far away from bliss? It's like, if you have a toothache, why do you keep touching it with your tongue? You go, that's painful. That's painful again. You keep there's some attraction to the pain, isn't there? And it's not that far away from bliss. So it's all kind of gets a bit foggy when you do what you were saying, where you just kind of close your eyes and really go into the sensation. And it seems, and this is kind of to put one level of storylines on it, but it kind of works for me. It seems that everything is built on this kind of ecstatic radiance or something. You know, it's kind of like it's there, but it's kind of taking different shapes. Like the pain can maybe be a more acute kind of shape of that ecstasy coming through, but it's all like, if you really delve deeply into it, it's all made of the same stuff, so to speak, which is a really odd thing to kind of explore.
Well, it's all a manifestation of this presence or consciousness or whatever we want to call it, this beingness, whatever. And, you know, I subtitled my second book, The Ecstasy of What Is, Awaken the Heartland, The Ecstasy of What Is. And I know Peter Brown speaks a lot about radiance, radiant presence and everything. And I use words like that sometimes, but I also find them, you know, now I'm playing devil's advocate again here, but, you know, I find that the pitfall in some of those words, and I don't know that I would have subtitled my book that now, you know, but because I think the pitfall in some of those words is that when people hear them, they immediately start to think, well, wait a minute, am I experiencing radiance? Am I experiencing ecstasy? No, I don't think I am. And so I feel like it's almost better just to sort of, I know what you're talking about, but you know, it's almost better to sort of stumble upon that, you know, that when you just go into something deeply and you just sort of tune into that presence, that beingness, that whatever shape it's taking, whether it's taking the shape of pain or pleasure or whatever shape it's taking, there is something there that's quite wonderful or ecstatic or radiant.